Welcome. I'm Simon Cataldo, your state representative for the 14th Middlesex District. This is The Whole Truth on ActonTV. We have a special show for you today. You're going to meet and hear from the entire state legislative delegation from Acton, Massachusetts. I'm really excited to share this episode with you. We're not going to do legislative issues per se. We're not going to do stump speeches. We're going to peel back the curtain a little bit and talk about what it's like to serve in the legislature on a more personal level. Senator Jamie Eldridge, Representative Dan Sena, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
So I wanted to start here. Both of you grew up, spent a good portion of your childhood, your school age years in the town of Acton. I grew up in Concord, which I also represent. What's it been like, Jamie, and we are going to use first names here. Jamie, what's it been like serving and representing in the legislature of the town where you grew up?
Yeah, no, I grew up in South Acton. My mom was a teacher in the Acton schools, and I got very interested in civics and history and cultural affairs, at a very early age. And so one of my first inspirations that impacts both Concord and Acton was the W.R. Grace Company contaminating wells that impacted both Acton and Concord. And so for me to see, a group of Acton residents come together, actually file the first lawsuit working with the EPA in the nation in winning and getting that cleaned up, it's still in the process. That to me was an example of sort of civic activism and the impact that people could have in the community. And so I think probably at a pretty early age, I had an interest that someday I would either run for office or somehow try to find a way to serve Acton. And so it's been a great example of how active Acton is, and it influenced me, later on to run for office.
So I think when people think about running for office where you grew up, they think of it generally as an advantage. But maybe less attention is paid to the other side of that, of what it's like campaigning with people who you've known your whole life. And in front of people who you've known your whole life, and opening up the possibility that those folks may vote against you or for your opponent. Rep, can you talk a little bit about that? You ran in a competitive election in Acton, people you've known since you were a teenager. What's that like, asking them for their vote and knowing that they may say no?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Simon, for having us here in your show. When I came to Acton, it was in 2001. I was 14 years old, and prior to that, I'm originally from the northeast of Brazil, and I was already passionate about social inequalities, looking at how can we close those gaps, and that was really within me in a desire to change. I don't want to say the world, but change as much as I could. So when I had a chance, and I was in high school, and that's how I met Senator Eldridge. I was in high school already, being a little activist in terms of supporting immigrant rights, student rights, access to higher education. And that's when I met Senator Eldridge. And from there, a lot has changed because I went to study political science at UMass Amherst. And I did a little bit of engineering, thinking I was going to be an engineer myself. And it was 10 years later, after the day that I had met Jamie, and I was already campaigning for Jamie then because I felt you were the right candidate at that time, Jamie, and I still believe so. And I went to work for Jamie as a district director. And that really allowed me to be in government and to help people. And really my desire was to connect people with resources, with services. I'm focused, people-driven personality in terms of what can I do to make your life a little bit easier. And that position really allowed me to work on constituent cases, to connect people with, unemployment, mass health, all the issues that, housing, all those issues that, people that are low income are facing in our region.
Jamie, what about for you? You're going, door to door. You've done this a number of times, but certainly at the very beginning, when you were running for state representative the first time, what was that like, knocking on the doors of people that you had known since you were a little kid and asking them for their vote?
Yeah, and the district at the time was 6 towns going out to Lunenburg, so it was mostly an area that I did not know people. But I will say, in Acton, it was awkward, right? Is you go to someone's house, and just because of their views or their positions on certain issues, that they would not support me. and just taking that in and saying you have to keep on going to the next door and keep persisting. At the time, interestingly, there was a lot of anti-housing sentiment, which I think has sort of changed in Massachusetts because people recognize the housing crisis. But early on, it was against, any development, any housing. And I had, then as I do now, a fairly pro-housing perspective, and people saying, well, you support Chapter 40B, so I'm not going to support you. And then in my second term was, of course, gay marriage, the SJC's ruling. And that was an area where some of my more, conservative constituents disagreed with me and said, not only I will vote against you, but I will work against you because of my strong feelings on that issue. So that was very tough.
And it's one thing when it's a stranger, right?
Right.
But it's another thing, and sometimes you're surprised when it's somebody you've known your whole life. You almost take for granted that they're going to support you, but then they're across from you on an issue. I remember my first time door knocking, I decided to go to the street where I grew up in West Concord, right actually on the Acton border, close to where the Stop and Shop is. And I went with my friend Jen, and I decided I was just going to knock on every door. Knowing that a lot of the people who I grew up with 20-something years ago still lived there. And I was shocked. About half of them all but slammed the door on my face when they knew my party affiliation. And that was really surprising. And I would say more difficult than it would have been just with everyday strangers.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
For me, the worst was in the winter when you have to door knock in the winter. For me, it was, I almost gave up one day. I was like, I can't do this. But after doing it for 10 hours a day, until dawn to dawn, so it was. I remember it was 2020 when I started door knocking, asking for their support. It's, it can be, I think overall it was very positive. Interactions with voters. Sometimes you have one or two that it maybe didn't go very well, but you just continue. So.
And you had the unique experience, unusual experiences of coming in a special election, right? So typically when you're door knocking, it's hot outside, it's the summer, and you were doing that in the winter.
And that was I think 3 elections in 1 year because the pandemic came, they had to change the date of the election, and that was prior that we already had spent some revenue on the campaign. So we had to redo it all over again. And it was on June 2nd that was the election. That's when I got elected. And then we had the primaries again, and then in November we had the final. So it was
during the pandemic. You had to stop knocking on doors at some point, right?
At some point, we had to shift everything for phone call, virtual, lots of Zoom meetings, and with many groups. So it was, it turns out a very positive experience despite COVID. So it was, it had its challenge to run for office during a pandemic.
So for those who don't know, Jamie's been here the longest in the legislature, then you, Dan, and then me. And I'm wondering, how have your thoughts changed about how to do this job and the best way to do this job since you came in? I'm assuming like everyone who's new and bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, you had strong feelings. I know I did when I first came in, and then you're there and you get more experience and things change. So reflecting upon that, either whether it's on issues or how to do the job, has anything changed in your mind?
Yeah, well, I think we probably all think, we all file our bills and say, well, this bill makes total sense, so it's obviously going to pass this session, right? And then you realize for a variety of reasons why certain bills don't pass. And so I would say, building coalitions, which I think each of us in our own way with our particular focus has been quite good at focusing on, issues for particularly for the two of you around like education in the literacy bill. But how do you build coalitions to gather support and recognizing that unless you build that coalition, obviously not only working with your colleagues, but advocates, activists, telling stories, that your legislation is just not going to pass. There's just so many bills, as we know, up on Beacon Hill, and it's, we know that not all of them, and actually, unfortunately, not too many of them will pass. So how do you build those coalitions? And I think the importance of building stronger relationships with colleagues that's so critical. I think probably early on, I wasn't as focused on that and realizing that you really needed to do that to partner to realistically get anything done. So,
Dan, what about you?
I think certainly a lot has changed for me in terms of how to work with the institution. Because sometimes you think, like what you just said, there's a great idea, great bill, it's going to go through, and it doesn't, right? So sometimes I just, there's a process, and I had to remind myself I am one in 160, and there's this institution. We have to follow the rules that the committee sets forward, and so at moments it can be daunting because of why this is not happening. But I think to your point, Jamie, it's really what's happening behind the scenes. In other words, with the coalition, with telling those stories that and that being replicated, right? And that's the major bills that I've seen passed. It was because the public was asking. There was coalition that was organized, meeting with key stakeholders on critical timing. Because it has to be organized. And I think even for them, I'm sure they strategize how they lobby for a bill, because we want to work together, right, with the coalition, with the Right to Read coalition, for example, with our early literacy bill. So it's really parents telling their stories of the system right now is not working. What can we do to change? And I think that really it needs momentum for any bill. For example, the police reform bill, I think we had the public advocating, pushing, and I think we got, that's why we got it done. And other key legislations that we have passed, it really is, I think it's certainly, a work in efforts in many, many sectors working together.
And I would add that, talking about stories, is that when you came in telling the story around your life experience in the driver's license for immigrants,
absolutely.
Very powerful to have those stories and move people that
absolutely
pass the bill.
Yeah, and the coalition that led the bill with Natalisa Tracy and others that was really organizing the whole state house pushing for why we should get this done. And it's looking back, it's really very meaningful when we get a bill that is going to impact the lives of so many people. Right, and that's what, oh my gosh, we're doing something for the greater good, and that's how sometimes I look at on many key issues.
I think it's sometimes lost on folks how grassroots the process of actually getting legislation across the finish line really is. And from the outside, certainly I'd count myself in this before I entered politics, it looks like this is a bill that passes is a legislator's idea.
Right, yep.
Right?
Yep.
It's almost never the case.
Right, exactly.
Bills that pass usually come from constituents who, usually not just alone, but sometimes alone initially, bring concerns or ideas to us. I know with our Right to Read bill, that was absolutely the case. Both of us signed on to it principally because an Acton constituent came to us, and she was backed by a big organization.
And I had worked for many years with her, with Nancy Duggan, who actually had reached out to me then about, dyslexia, people with disabilities, students not getting the needs and services that they need, even with, at the local level. So that I already had a little history in terms of an understanding as to why, some of these barriers needs to be removed. So I think this bill certainly, I think it addresses key issues that we're having. It might not solve the literacy crisis, but it will make those numbers much better than where we are now. And I think that's what we have to aim. It's just improving the system, Well
said.
Jamie, what do you like the most about doing this job? I may ask you what you like the least too, but we'll start with what you like the most.
Right. What are my strengths and weaknesses? Well, I think what's very special about a state legislative seat that, with no disrespect, is a little different from Congress and the local level, is that we go to the State House, we advocate on statewide legislation, but we also have a real direct impact, in our districts. Whether it's fighting for a project, state funding, earmark, sort of weighing in on an issue, and I think that is very special. I think that as much as our congressmen and women have a very difficult job to do, because of that, I think it's difficult for them to maintain the local contact in the work in D.C. I think what's great about our job is, we can go into the State House today, go to a committee hearing, go to a forum, but in the evening we're at a district event, having a direct impact. And I think that is a very special interaction, and I would argue at this sort of point in our country's history, people want to see us active, responding to what's happening at the federal level, but also passing, meaningful state legislation that's just important in people's everyday lives. So I think that mix is very unique to being a legislator and makes every day of our jobs interesting and different. So
that was such a great response. For me, it's the same. It's
Yeah,
the dynamic nature of this job. We're taping this show first thing in the morning, going into an education committee hearing, meeting with constituents at the State House, going home to coach soccer at night, and then I'll finally, after that, after the kids are in bed, get to constituent emails. So it really that mix is great. What about you, Dan? What do you like the most about it?
It's really helping people. Sometimes I'm out at an event or at a grocery store, and someone comes to me and says, "Dan, your office helped me with X, Y, Z." And that's really meaningful to me. It's like, okay, my team in my office, we're doing something, we're getting something done for the community. At the local level, at the micro, because when you help someone, you're changing that person's life, at least for that moment, and they will never forget that. And I think that it's something that I learned when I was in your office, Jamie. Every person that reaches out to his office or my office now, we go and we help anyone. And I think that's really key to represent people, is for them to feel represented, that they can rely on my office on a particular issue. But what I enjoy the most is really just going out to events, seeing people, working with them, passing key legislations. That certainly becomes very more meaningful than the current position. But it's a pleasure, to be honest with you. I feel honored every single day to be in a position where I'm representing thousands of people. It's very meaningful. Sometimes I have to pinch myself. Is this true? Am I the one here doing some of this work? So it's really rewarding.
You mentioned, Dan, your team, your staff. I was talking to Ed Markey the other day, our U.S. Senator, and he was telling me that when he first came into the House, they did not have staff. The members of the House of Representatives did not have staff.
Yeah.
And one of the issues that he was fighting for, that actually got him crosswise with leadership at the time, was asking for a legislative aide for every member of the House. I cannot imagine doing this job without a
no
staffer.
Computers. Was it computers then?
Definitely not.
Cut that part out. No disrespect. So, but what I wanted to ask both of you is, obviously we take for granted, we'll just leave to the side the fact that our staffs are so essential to what we do. Tell me about what you're looking for when you have an opening. I mean, what are the qualities of a staffer that you view as essential to do this important job?
Yeah, I always think that, obviously we need our staff to be responsive. I think even when we don't have an answer, having someone that says, okay, I don't know the answer to that, but let me, I'm responding to you and I'm going to look into it. Because I think the worst thing for all of us is when we bump into a constituent at a grocery store or something and the person says, oh, well, I emailed your office and I haven't heard back.
Right.
You want the person to have a response and say, they're looking into it, let me know what the answer is or how to answer your concern. So I think that's the first piece. I would say definitely a passion for, issues, hopefully the issues that we care about, but I think generally just a passion for service and realizing that, if someone calls at a Friday afternoon that just doesn't have fuel assistance or just got, lost their mass health, we're going to respond to that person that it's a crisis as it is in that person's life and not delay it till Monday. So I think those two qualities, and I would say probably the last is just being collaborative, right? Is recognizing that, we need to work with other legislative offices, other state agencies, and if you don't maintain a good sort of honest relationship, then you're not going to get the service for our constituents. So,
Dan, what about you?
Well said, Jamie.
And I've had the pleasure. I want to say I've had the pleasure of working with both of your staffs. Quite frequently. Most recently, Will quite a bit, and they've just both been fantastic.
Thank you. Multitasking, I think it's an ability that you ought to have, an ability to put something aside and focus on another, because priorities can come as they go, and can pause something, do this. But I think also be wanting to create some kind of change in the world or in government, in your town, in your state. The desire to be a public servant. I think that has to be there. And having the ability to multitask and that. I think anyone would be able to perform the job. Certainly, everyone has different skills and different mindsets, and finding that and matching, the ability to do some research or to, improve a piece of legislation or do an outreach to constituents. So I think it really looking at the quality, the strength of your employee, and maybe devote some more of those tasks for him or her.
Both of you touched on something that I think is so important and really rare, especially with the kind of Gen Z generations that has a lot of answers at their fingertips. In this job, often the answers are not at your fingertips. And even more challenging, a lot of the times when we reach out to the state bureaucracy to get an answer for a constituent, the answer is no. And you need to figure out how to get them to yes, because no is not acceptable for the situation that our constituent is in, whether it's with the Department of Unemployment Assistance, Mass Health, food assistance, fuel assistance. And so pushing and thinking creatively about how to get around a problem, or telling the bureaucrat on the other end of the line that their answer is not acceptable to our office, right?
Exactly.
That is something that I think is a really hard and unique skill, and that all of our staffers need to be able to do.
And it gets to a point that, let's say my aide cannot resolve an issue, I'll do that call and I'll step in.
Sometimes things
and we do a lot of that sometimes when it comes to unemployment, and they're not happy with some decisions, and at least we get them to revisit the case. So, but sometimes we have to step in.
All of us have been pretty active in trying to encourage other people to run for office, whether it's local, state, federal office, anything. What advice do you have for people who are interested in, who think maybe in the back of their mind, maybe in some little corner of their brain, that maybe that might be for me at some point? Jamie?
Yeah, I would say, and I will say it's been, I represent one city, Marlborough, so there's city elections going on right now. So there are some new people running, including some young people, which is great. I do sort of give them a little bit of expectation about what the job is, because I think sometimes people think it's a glorified position or somehow, you're like a celebrity or something, but often it's sort of the grunt work each and every day. So I do try to let them know that. And then I would say, as far as running for office, as we all know and how we all want is, it's about, speaking of grunt work, it's about the door-to-door every day. It's the phone calls, it's the outreach with a clear message. And it's not about showing up at, the most popular event, but it's spending, 5, 6, 7 hours a day going door to door. And that's how you win. But in return, sort of speaking to what you said, Dan, earlier, is the honor of being in public service, right? It's just such an honor to be able to give back and make a difference. That's the reward, and that's why it's worth doing this work that's often not very, glorious. So, yeah.
Dan, what about you?
I never thought an immigrant would be able to be a state representative, to be honest with you. I was like, my chances are low here in terms of being, but I was serving the public when I was in high school. I joined a free medical program in Sudbury, and I was doing interpreting for patients that couldn't speak English. For me, that was so rewarding, Jamie. I went home and was like, I went to go to bed. I'm like, oh my gosh, I did so good service today. To me, that was very rewarding. So even though I had no elected positions, but I was already doing small things within my community and how I can make life better for others. And that, to me, was very rewarding. And that kind of just one decision led to another, that even I know Senator Eldridge got funding for that Metro West medical program at some point for some of their equipments that they needed. So, looking back, and it's just, I would be serving the public if it wasn't for this position in another way. Because certainly it's, I think, like you said, I think it needs to come from the heart. It needs to be self-driven as to why you want to, serve the public or represent them.
Yeah, that's very well said. I just want to go back to the beginning of your careers. Is there anything that you think, now looking back on it, you would have done differently at the outset, that, looking back on it now, you think, oh man, why did I do it that way? What could I have done? What could I have done differently? How could I have spent my time differently?
That's a tough question. Yeah. I would say that, I was very focused on running for office straight out of law school. Interestingly, it was an earlier redistricting is that I had the opportunity to run for state rep in a slightly different district.
Okay.
And I passed on it because I was just out of law school and working as a lawyer. And I just think, thank goodness it worked out. But at that time I made the decision not to run and thinking, geez, what if I hadn't got elected the second time around,
Yeah.
So
I think so much of this is in terms of how we come in.
Yes.
Is really luck in many cases.
A lot of it is.
Right? There's definitely the hard work aspect of it. Don't want to diminish that at all. But if you look, out at the panoply of our colleagues, people come in under really different circumstances, highly contested, uncontested, special elections, things like that. And then, it's up to you to stay there. We're coming to the end of our time. I am so grateful that both of you, during what I know are very, very busy days in multiple locations, came in to have this discussion. It's been really nice. It's such an honor to work with both of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks for having us on. Appreciate it.
Of
course.
Great delegation.
Yeah, it is a great delegation. I think that our constituents, our shared constituents, know how much we enjoy working together, but it's always a good reminder. And I hope that folks who have been watching have enjoyed, peeling back the curtain a little bit and hearing something from people who you may already know very well, but about stories and experiences that they haven't had the opportunity to share before. Thank you so much for joining us on The Whole Truth at ActonTV.